The Syrian Civil War is an ongoing multi-sided armed conflict with international interventions taking place in Syria. The unrest grew out of the 2011 Arab Spring protests, and escalated to armed conflict after President Bashar al-Assad's government violently repressed protests calling for his removal. The war is being fought by the Syrian government, a loose alliance of Syrian Arab rebel groups, the Syrian Democratic Forces, Salafi jihadist groups and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. All sides receive substantial support from foreign actors, leading many to label the conflict a proxy war waged by the regional and world major powers. Under the Assad regime, Syria went through significant neoliberal economic reform. This reform exacerbated disparities in wealth, which combined with a recession and several years of drought led to the spread of the Arab Spring to Syria. Protests quickly spread to the predominantly Kurdish areas of northern Syria. Syrian opposition groups formed the Free Syrian Army and seized control of the area surrounding Aleppo and parts of southern Syria. Over time, factions of the Syrian opposition split from the original moderate politics to pursue an Islamist vision for Syria, as al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. In the north, Syrian government forces largely withdrew to fight the FSA, allowing the Kurdish YPG to move in and claim de facto autonomy. In 2015 the YPG joined forces with Arab, Assyrian, Armenian and Turkmen groups forming the Syrian Democratic Forces. As of February 2016 the government held 40% of Syria. ISIL held around 20 to 40%, Arab rebel groups 20%, and 15 to 20% is held by the Syrian Democratic Forces. Both the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Syrian Army have made recent gains against ISIL. International organizations have accused the Syrian government, ISIL and other opposition forces of severe human rights violations, with multiple massacres occurring. The conflict caused a considerable displacement of population. On the 1st of February 2016, a formal start of the UN-mediated Geneva-Syria peace talks was announced by the UN, with the fighting continuing unabated. Background: Assad government Syria became an independent republic in 1946, although democratic rule ended with a coup in March 1949, followed by two more coups the same year. A popular uprising against military rule in 1954 saw the army transfer power to civilians. From 1958 to 1961, a brief union with Egypt replaced Syria's parliamentary system with a highly centralized presidential regime. The secular Ba'ath Syrian regional branch government came to power through a successful coup d'état in 1963. The next several years Syria went through additional coups and changes in leadership. In March 1971, Hafiz Assad, an Alawite, declared himself president, a position that he held until his death in 2000. Since 1970, the secular Syrian regional branch has remained the dominant political authority in what had been a one-party state until the first multi-party election to the People's Council of Syria was held in 2012. On the 31st of January 1973, Assad implemented the new constitution which led to a national crisis. Unlike previous constitutions, this one did not require that the president of Syria must be a Muslim, leading to fierce demonstrations in Hama, Homs and Aleppo organized by the Muslim Brotherhood and the ulama. They labeled Assad as the enemy of Allah and called for a jihad against his rule. Robert D. Kaplan has compared Assad's coming to power to an untouchable becoming Maharaja in India or a Jew becoming Tsar in Russia, an unprecedented development shocking to the Sunni majority population which had monopolized power for so many centuries. The regime survived a series of armed revolts by Sunni Islamists, mainly members of the Muslim Brotherhood, from 1976 until 1982. In 2000, Bashar al-Assad took over as president of Syria upon Hafez al-Assad's death. He and his wife, Asma al-Assad, a Sunni Muslim born and educated in Britain, initially inspired hopes for democratic reforms. A Damascus spring of social and political debate took place between July 2000 and August 2001. The Damascus Spring largely ended in August 2001 with the arrest and imprisonment of 10 leading activists who had called for democratic elections and a campaign of civil disobedience. In the opinion of his critics, Bashar Assad had failed to deliver on promised reforms. The Assad government opposed the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, and the Bush administration undertook to destabilize the regime by increasing sectarian tensions, showcasing and publicizing Syrian repression of radical Kurdish and Sunni groups, and financing political dissidents. In addition, Assad opposed the Qatar-Turkey pipeline in 2009. A classified 2013 report by a joint U.S. Army and intelligence group concluded that bringing down Assad would have drastic consequences, since the opposition supported by the Obama administration was dominated by jihadist elements. The report was ignored, according to Michael T. Flynn, the then director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, by the U.S. administration. Demographics prior to the outbreak of the war, according to the U.S. government's estimates that were not based on any official Syrian sources, Syria's population was 18 million. Sunni Muslims represented approximately 74% of the population. Other Muslim groups, including Alawites, together constituted approximately 13% of the population. Druze accounted for approximately 3%. Various Christian denominations and ethnicities made up the remaining 10% of the population. The majority of Syria's Christians belonged to the Eastern Christian churches, such as the Syriac Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox Church of Antioch, a Syrian Church of the East, and Armenian Orthodox Church that had existed in the region since the earliest days of Christianity. The Assad family that has ruled Syria since 1970 is mixed. Bashar himself is married to a Sunni woman, with whom he has several children. His parents belonged to the minority Alawite sect that comprised an estimated 12% of the total population. The Alawite clan is believed to be in control of Syria's security apparatus. Syrian Kurds, an ethnic minority accounting for approximately 9% of the population, have been disgruntled over ethnic discrimination and denial of their cultural and language rights. Assyrians, an indigenous Eastern Aramaic-speaking Christian Semitic people, numbering approximately 500,000, and are found mainly in the northeast of Syria, with a larger population over the border in northern Iraq. Other ethnic groups include Armenians, Circassians, Turkomans, Greeks, Malami, Kaulia, Yazidi, Shabaks and Mandaeans. Socioeconomics. At the start of the war, discontent against the government was said to be the strongest in Syria's poor areas, predominantly among conservative Sunnis. These included cities with high poverty rates, such as Daraa and Homs, and the poorer districts of large cities. Socio-economic inequality increased significantly after free market policies were initiated by Hafez al-Assad in his later years, and accelerated after Bashar al-Assad came to power. with an emphasis on the service sector. These policies benefited a minority of the nation's population, mostly people who had connections with the government, or members of the Sunni merchant class of Damascus and Aleppo. The country also faced particularly high youth unemployment rates. This coincided with the most intense drought ever recorded in Syria, which lasted from 2007 to 2010 and that resulted in a widespread crop failure, increase in food prices and a mass migration of farming families to urban centers. Syria had also received in the same period around 1.5 million refugees from Iraq. By 2011, Syria was facing steep rises in the prices of commodities and a clear deterioration in the national standard of living. Human rights. The state of human rights in Syria had long been the subject of harsh criticism from global organizations. Rights of free expression, association, and assembly were strictly controlled in Syria even before the uprising. The country was under emergency rule from 1963 until 2011. Public gatherings of more than 5 people were banned. Security forces were effectively granted sweeping powers over arrest and detention. The authorities harassed and imprisoned human rights activists and other critics of the government, who were often indefinitely detained and tortured in poor prison conditions. Women and ethnic minorities faced discrimination in the public sector. Thousands of Syrian Kurds were denied citizenship in 1962 and the descendants labeled foreigners. A number of riots in 2004 prompted increased tension in Syria's Kurdish areas, and there have been occasional clashes between Kurdish protesters and security forces ever since. Despite hope for democratic change with the 2000 Damascus Spring, Bashar al-Assad was widely regarded as having failed to implement any improvements. A Human Rights Watch report issued just before the beginning of the 2011 uprising stated that he had failed to substantially improve the state of human rights since taking power.